It's a myth that Taino cultural heritage disappeared in Haiti without a trace. If you know where to look, you can find it. You know, Taino cultural heritage, basically, when the enslaved Africans first arrived on the island in 1503, island of Haiti in 1503, they encountered the few surviving Taino, right? Because they were enslaved alongside the Taino, and they absorbed customs into the forming Haitian culture, right? So to this day, this Taino culture elements such as cassava bread. The Taino people taught the Africans who later became the Haitians those how to neutralize the poison out of cassava bread. So now you have Taino culture elements in the Haitian culture. A lot of people believe that the Haitian culture is purely African, that there are no Taino culture elements, or that the Taino people just died, that their blood doesn't exist in the Haitian population, or that the culture died and there's no elements in the Haitian culture. That's not true. You know, and I had like a conversation with this dude. I was talking about that when the ancestors of Haitians first arrived on the island in 1503, they counted as Taino, and he was like, "No, that's Dominican history. That's not Haitian history." I was like, Haitian history doesn't begin with the French. It begins, well, the recorded Haitian history begins in 1492, when Christopher Columbus and the Spanish immigrants came to our island. That's that's when the recorded history begins, right? And the first Africans, they came in 1503. They absorbed those customs from the Taino because they were enslaved alongside each other. So that custom, those elements of that culture still exist in the Haitian culture. You know, even even the word Haiti or Haiti, as people know it, that's a Taino name, right? That's a Taino word. It means mountainous land, right? When the Haitians freed the entire island from slavery and colonialism in 1804, we restored that name, Haiti, in honor of the Taino people. Like, in honor. So every time we say we're Haitian or Haitian, we're honoring the people who were on the island before we arrived. So every time we say Haitian, Haitian, Haiti, we're remembering the memory of our Taino predecessors, because they were on an island. They call that island Haiti, right, for a reason. But the Spaniards, Christopher Columbus, called it Hispaniola. The Haitians like no. So that's even a Taino culture element in the Haitian culture. That word Haiti, this word is like Kichoi. Kichoi is a Taino word. Kichoi. There's so many words in the Haitian culture that comes from the Taino. You know, and this guy, he was talking about that the Haitians learned how to prepare cassava bread from the Dominicans when DR was on the Haitian rule. When there's a picture in Saint Domingue of enslaved Africans in 1670, in the 1600s, preparing cassava bread. No, they learned that practice directly from the Taino. The Haitians learned that practice directly from the Taino. So basically, it's obvious that the French were enslaving Haitians who were descendants of the first Africans who arrived on the island in the 1500s, or the descendants or the mixed descendants of the Taino Africans who intermixed in the 1500s, and they passed that culture, those elements, to the enslaved Africans who arrived on the island in the 1600s to 1700s. So this is why that culture still exists. They transmitted those culture, that element, you know. So that's why I believe that we, the Haitian people, should tell our story. Don't let other people tell our story, you know. Like cassava bread is a Taino dish. It was a staple dish of the Taino, and that's still a part of the Haitian culture. Even though the Taino people are no longer here, they're no longer Taino communities. Some aspects of the culture still exist. You know, I believe like we, to preserve or to and honor the Taino people, because the Haitian people should like make more dishes that come from the Taino, right? Like cassava bread is one of them, but we should make more yuca or cassava dishes, based dishes, so in honor of them. You know, I believe that that's what we should do to preserve aspects of their culture. We should also start using Taino words. Like some words, we should start using it with each other to honor them. Like Haiti, mountainous land, you know, Detroit, other Taino words. We should start using it with each other so we can incorporate those words into the Haitian language. We should also start calling our language, instead of Creole, we should say Haitian or Haitian. See, this is how you preserve or the memory of the Taino people who were here before we arrived on the island. Just like our ancestors, when they freed the entire island from slavery and colonialism in 1804, they gave the original name. They renamed or restored Hispaniola to Haiti. See, they know what they were doing, you know. So I just wanted to make this video because a lot of people believe that Taino cultural heritage disappeared in Haiti without a trace. That's not true. Know where to look. You need to. If you're not Haitian, of course you're not going to understand that. But outsiders believe that Taino cultural heritage disappeared. But there's enslaved. There's a painting in Saint Domingue where African slaves were making Taino. Making cassava bread. How did they learn that? You know what I'm saying? So it's a myth that it disappeared without a trace. The Taino people were absorbed into the enslaved African population in the 1500s, and they absorbed those customs from the Taino. So it still exists. Still exists. Peace.